Are the Royals targeting a specific type of player via trade? Do they have any chance on any of the big name pitchers? And lastly, where did Nick Loftin go after the Arizona Fall League? All of that is coming up next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I am your host, Jack Johnson, and be sure to follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15, and catch all these podcasting episodes on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, and you can always find us on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If this is your first episode tuning in to Locked On Royals, of course, welcome in. I'm sure that you are looking for daily Royals content, and you've come to the right place because I'm also a diehard Royals fan, and I work in sports. I work here in Kansas City at Sports Radio 810 WHB. I've got a night show on 810 WHB. I also got a morning show on ESPN Kansas City, so stay pretty busy in the sports world. But when you come to this podcast, just know you are getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball, all things Royals, whether it be questions, thoughts, opinions from you, the listener, you, the follower, or it's just breaking news or stuff that I want to talk about. We very much, though, keep it listener-based here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's show is brought to you by Jase Medical, and we'll have more on them coming up in about 10 to 15 minutes or so. But I know that from time to time you get worried about payments, worrying about car payments, house payments, child payment, stuff like that. Well, you want to make sure you've got stuff taken care of health-wise, and Jase Medical is going to be your outlet to do so. But again, more on them coming up in about 10 to 15 minutes or so. The beauty of November, and I would say much more so December, but early parts of November, getting into the early parts of December in the off season, is it's so fresh, it's so new. And a lot of it is going to come down to rumors. Usually at this point of the season, or the off season, you should say, it's all about rumors. You don't really have any definitive sources. Sometimes you hear names being thrown around. Teams are talking to a certain player, and then that falls through. Or maybe it progresses and the hot stove gets hotter and hotter and hotter. What I was hoping for is the Royals to at least be linked to a few names, not only for segment ideas and content ideas, but just to kind of get a good grasp as to who they're looking for out there, because this is just scratching the surface. It's very important to keep, on top of, to be engaged with guys the Royals are talking to, because once it finally molds into something, once the Royals actually sign that first player, then you can kind of get an idea of how they're trying to construct this roster. And it's been dead silent. In the first couple weeks of the offseason, the Royals really hadn't been linked to anybody. And it wasn't till this morning that I came across an article from Mark Feinstein on Twitter. He does a great job covering all things in Major League Baseball, not just centric to the Royals. And they've been on top of it and the GM meetings here. Now, the GM meetings, I believe, were cut short because of a virus going around. But I do feel like there has been some advanced talks, not only with the player we're going to talk about, but I'm sure the Royals are kind of exploring all outlets here. But I thought it was interesting because last week, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, sometimes I get the days all mixed up, but the Tigers acquired Mark Canha. And Mark Canha was a guy that really made his name for Oakland. And then he got shipped off to the Mets. And for the Mets, I don't think that he was a lowly contributor at all. I think his production stayed pretty consistent. He's always been a very high OBP guy. And, I don't think that he's aged poorly by any stretch. This year, he had a 2.2 WAR. He played in 50 games for Milwaukee. He had 89 for the Mets this past year and stayed pretty consistent. In fact, for the Mets, he had an OBP of 343. And for the Brewers, he had an OBP of 373. And that was at age 34. So he still very much had stuff in the tank. So the Tigers saw that and said, we're going to jump all over that. We are going to acquire a guy like Mark Canha. He's a little bit older, may not be the best defensively, but we need a middle of the lineup type of bat. We need a high OBP guy. Mark Canha really fits that mold. I didn't think too much of it when that trade happened. I thought, Detroit's adding their lineup again. They need a lot of offensive help. But then we find out today, per Mark Feinstein, that the Royals were actually engaged in talks with the Brewers for Mark Canha. Now, how advanced were those talks? I guess we'll never know. Now that the trade officially happened with Mark Canha going to Detroit from Milwaukee. Maybe the Royals were not willing to part ways with the guys that the Brewers were throwing out there. Maybe the asking price was a bit high. Maybe the Royals didn't think there was that much steep competition. Here's the thing, though. The Royals have a depleted farm system. I'm sure that factored into it. I'm sure the Brewers were looking at that and saying, there's nobody in your system that you're going to be willing to part ways with when you talk about Frank Mozzicato, you talk about maybe Caden Wallace, you talk about Ben Kudrna. There's guys, maybe Blake Mitchell, some of the guys you just took, Carson Roccaforte, Hunter Owen. There's guys that maybe the Royals and Jase Medical said, no, we're not moving on from any of those guys for a 34-year-old bat, even if it is the corner outfield bat we're looking for. What I did think was interesting, though, is a little bit of the silver lining in this. For years under Dayton Moore, and even I would say in the first year under J.J. Piccolo, the players they were going after did not fit modern baseball. And what I mean by that is the Royals won a certain way back in 2013, 14, and 15 that's really not repeatable in modern baseball. Back then, the Royals won on speed, defense, and pitching. Now in modern baseball, you need a lot of guys in that lineup that can get on base. The Royals thought with a bunch of speed guys, you just pound them in the ground, leg it out, and win a lot of games 3-2, 4-3, stuff like that. It can get you a lot of wins maybe in stretches, but to win against the big dogs, win against the alphas in the American League, you got to be able to outslug them. And the Royals didn't outslug anybody last year. It was not a very good offense. It was a roller coaster ride for the 2023 season. But even though they came up short, and maybe you're listening to this and going, why are we even talking about a guy the Royals never got? Why are we even talking or wasting our time on Mark Canha? It was a loss for the Royals. They didn't get a guy in Detroit, a team in their own division, who's better than them right now, goes out and gets better offensively. We don't know who was offered in certain packages. We don't know how far the trade talks progressed. Maybe it was Kansas City calling and saying, hey, what's the asking price for Mark Canha? The Brewers said this, and the Royals said no, never mind. That's as far. And Oakland also was in talks with Mark Canha. So two of the lowly teams, two of the worst teams in baseball, were trying to add Mark Canha to that lineup. And maybe Mark Canha would have started for the Royals, maybe not. I think his numbers would indicate that he could. I mean, you look over the course of his career, he's had an OBP north of 328 or higher going all the way back to 2018. He is very much so a professional and mature hitter, which is what I wanted in this corner outfield bat. We brought it up in yesterday's episode of Michael Brantley. You want a professional and mature hitter, a high OBP guy, even if they're not going to be playing every single day. The silver lining in this, though, is I think the Royals are looking for the right players. In past years, I think you would have seen them going for the Billy Hamiltons of the world, right? Very fast, good defenders, the Michael A. Taylors of the world. That just doesn't always fit modern baseball unless your lineup is like the Braves or the Dodgers, a loaded lineup. Then you can go get yourself a Michael A. Taylor. It's why Michael A. Taylor worked in Minnesota. That lineup was already good. Now, it was a big swing and miss offense, and it ended up not being one of the better offenses in all of baseball, but it worked there for him. When you are supposed to be one of the top contributors and you're not a high OBP guy, it's just not going to work out. The Royals have plenty of low OBP guys, and they have for quite some time. But you're starting to change that narrative. You're starting to change that approach, and I can get on board with that, even though it's a swing and miss with Mark Canha. Even though you're not getting the guy that maybe you were going after. Maybe he was option one of the corner outfield bats. Maybe it was because the first rumblings we ever had of the Royals targeting somebody. But this now opens the door for other high OBP guys the Royals are looking for. And maybe it's not through free agency. I thought it was very interesting they're trying the trade route first before jumping into the free agent pool. I think it's very, very fascinating because the Royals don't have a lot to offer, but it's clear they can add via that outlet. There are going to be players on their major league roster in AAA that somebody like Milwaukee or somebody that's trying to cut a little bit of the payroll would be willing to listen on. So just because of the swing and miss on Mark Canha doesn't make me think that this is the end-all, be-all. Mark Canha was the only option. No, the next option, you just go down the list. You see else who is available. If the trade outlet has been exhausted, then you go through free agency. But I'm not really discouraged by the Royals missing out on Mark Canha, at least for Mark Feinstein. They were in talks, and like I said, I don't know how advanced those talks were, but I like the player they're targeting. I would have loved to hear what names were thrown out, but we may never get to that point and probably won't. But if you're targeting a high OBP guy for the corner outfield spot, I'm all on board with it. Can't wait to see which other guys they're going to be linked to. Okay, the next thing we're going to dive into is these top pitchers in free agency. I was asked this by a follower on Twitter about, do the Royals have any chances with those high-end guys? I do believe one guy makes a lot of sense for the Royals, and I'll tell you who next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, let's give a shout out to the title sponsor today in Jase Medical. Whether you're on extended travel, bracing for a major weather event, or limited by yet another supply shortage, you are covered, my friend. Thanks to our partners at Jase Medical, life-saving antibiotics and a long list of daily medications can be ordered in a 1-year supply. Even ED generics for Cialis, Viagra, and Revaccio prescriptions. Go online right now at jasemedical.com to receive your 12-month supply on your daily medication. Remember, use promo code LOCKEDON at checkout for a discount as well. If you or someone you love would get some peace of mind by having a year's supply of any daily medication, go to jasemedical.com to see if it's offered for you. Remember to use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off on your purchase at Jase Medical. Again, every single week, I'm going to continue to do this with asking listeners, followers, going to try to really expand on the social media outreach through Instagram, through TikTok, stuff like that, but getting questions as to what we want to talk about. It doesn't always have to be a mailbag Friday. What are we thinking about? What are some of our opinions, thoughts, stuff like that? I always want to lean on the listeners for that, because you have things that need to be answered. You have questions about this team, and I want to provide those answers to you. And one of the listeners asked me, what are the Royals' chances on some of those big-name guys? And maybe semi-big-name pitchers. Eduardo Rodriguez is a guy that I really believe is going to be a top 5 type of payroll pitcher. Somebody is going to overpay for Eduardo Rodriguez because of what he was able to do in Detroit this past year. Then you've got names like Seth Lugo. And then you've got names like Lucas Giolito. Of those 3 pitchers, I think that Seth Lugo is the cheapest. I think that you could look for a contract anywhere from a 2-year to $24 million, $12 million per year. You look at maybe 13. If it's the Royals, you might need to overpay a little bit. Here's where I stand, though. Rodriguez, throw that option out. I don't see Eduardo Rodriguez signing for the Royals, and I don't see the Royals shelling out big-time money for a guy like him. Lucas Giolito, I think, would make a little bit of sense, but he's going to get a decent-sized contract as well. It wouldn't shock me if he's into the 3 to 4 year range. And I could see somebody like the Giants giving him a contract like that. I know the Orioles need some rotational help. It would not shock me if those teams maybe spent a little bit more to go get somebody like Lucas Giolito to be a number 2. Now, Seth Lugo, I think, makes a lot of sense for the Royals. And I mean a lot of sense. Here's why. Number one, the Royals were already interested in Seth Lugo last year. Like we talked about with Mark Canha, how advanced, how progressive those talks were, we don't really know. Okay, because once that player signs or is traded to another team, you don't really hear much about it again. You kind of just cut it right there. You never really know more than that. But the fact that the Royals were interested last year, missed out with him going to the Padres, and then him going to San Diego and pitching very well. The Royals even saw him in that series in San Diego earlier on in the year. It was one of their few road series wins of the year. But they saw Seth Lugo. Actually roughed up Seth Lugo a little bit. But he is somebody I think fits this rotation really well and is the perfect type of number 1 you could use. Because here's where I'm at. Cole Reagans, assuming he stays healthy, is going to be this team's number 1 pitcher. That's just the reality, and that's what I have set my mind to. He, by the end of the year, is going to be this team's best pitcher. But you don't go into 2024 putting ace expectation on him. You don't tell a guy who's got less than 140 innings in his career, hey, go give us 180, 190 innings. That just doesn't make too much sense. So you go out there and get a guy who you're not overpaying for, who has good stuff, has good numbers, and you make him the number one. I think it's very important to note that Brady Singer, coming off that 2022 season, the Royals still brought back Zach Greinke and Jordan Lyles because they didn't want to put that expectation on Brady Singer just yet. Now, in the end, it didn't really work out, but I don't think it was because the Royals tried to take the pressure off him. I think it's very smart for the Royals to go get them somebody through free agency to give you 160, 170 innings. They would need that. And I think Seth Lugo can give you that. And he's got good stuff. I think he's got one of the best curveballs in all of baseball. I mean, I think he didn't anchor the rotation for San Diego, but he put up really good numbers. Now, the only thing that would scare you away, he's another mid-30s type of pitcher. Do you want to give him a 2-year deal? I think I'd be fine with it. 2-year for $24 million. I mean, that's a very affordable deal for the Royals. It makes a lot of sense. I tweeted this out earlier today, and you could follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15, that if there were two guys you could add to this rotation with good numbers and would be affordable, I think Seth Lugo makes a lot of sense. And then I think Wade Miley makes a lot of sense. Wade Miley had good numbers for Milwaukee this past year. Now, I believe he missed a large chunk of 2022, and he's another older pitcher around mid-30s to upper 30s. But again, you are trying to look at these pitchers to then flip at the deadline. Okay, if you want to feel like, or if you believe you are going to be contending for the entire season, then go out there and get you a Lucas Giolito. Go out there and get you a Marcus Stroman. Go out there and get you an Aaron Nola, a Jordan Montgomery. If you believe you can, then all right, because that's commitment. You can't sign somebody to a 4 or 5 year deal, then trade him at the deadline. It just doesn't make any sense. But you give somebody a 1 or a 2 year deal, that then makes sense. If Seth Lugo gets a 2-year deal from the Royals, he's the opening day starter, he's the guy. Well, then you get to July, depending where the Royals are at, you could flip him. And then you have that extra year under the contract that could give teams more incentive. They could give you a better return. These are all things you need to factor in. And I thought it was a little bit funny that I was responded to on Twitter of somebody saying that rotation, which my rotation would have been Seth Lugo, Cole Reagans, Brady Singer, Wade Miley, and Alec Marsh. You could throw in Serpa if you want to, Lynch, Bubic, maybe a revolving door at the fifth spot. And he said that rotation loses 90 games. As bad as that sounds, and even though 90 losses should never be a goal, you never go into the offseason and say, how do we get to 90 losses? That would also be a 16-win improvement with that rotation alone. That's not to say who they could add through the bullpen. That's not even to say who they'd add as the corner outfield bat, what pieces they kind of construct for this lineup. That's just the rotation. If this rotation was 16 wins better than last year, that is a tremendous improvement, and you didn't overpay. You're not overspending for a number one. I think there's value in a lot of guys that the Royals can make this rotation a little bit more stable. Because there was no stability in the rotation this past year. Everybody saw it. Okay, you go out there and get some stability. Guys that threw 150 innings, an ERA around 3.3, 3.4. Why would you not want that in Kansas City? You're not breaking bank. You're not going all in, but that does make the team better. And you can win with a rotation like that. If they get hurt, then okay. But it's about adding depth there. They want to add depth to the bullpen. They want to add depth to the rotation. You can't just run out the same group again, and you can't just sign a true number one and not fill in the rest of the holes. Let's say you go out there and sign Aaron Nola to be your number one. Just speaking strictly hypotheticals here. You'd have Cole Reagans and Brady Singer and Jordan Lyles and Alec Marsh. Is that rotation significantly better than last year? I guess it depends on how well Brady Singer, Jordan Lyles, and Alec Marsh bounce back. But I would like the insurance of knowing I can add two guys to the rotation. I pretty much know what they're going to give you, and they've shown good numbers before at the big league level. I would like that in my rotation over just running it back or spending all my money on a number one. Maybe they go through the trade outlet, but I think there's very affordable and valuable free agents like a Seth Lugo out there. So to the followers' question, Rodriguez doesn't make too much sense in the timeline. Giolito, I just have talked myself out of that. Seth Lugo, absolutely, especially with past interest from the Royals. I think it makes a lot of sense, and I would probably put a little bit of money down that the Royals make a move like that. Whether it's Seth Lugo or not, I know Frankie Montas is also a free agent. He's been battling injuries, but the Royals were a dark horse to get him when he was available, and the Yankees gave him a bigger contract there. So to me, there are many guys out there that can fit your rotation, and you're not overpaying. Seth Lugo, of those guys I listed, makes the most sense to me. All right, the last thing I want to dive into is a question I was asked of where's Nick Loftin? He was in the Arizona Fall League one day, and then he was just gone. We'll talk about it next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can always follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And catch all these podcasting episodes on where you get your podcast. That can be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, and on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. The last thing we're going to dive into is Nick Loftin and his whereabouts. I know that the Arizona Fall League can be a little bit tricky because one day they're in the lineup, one day they're gone, and then you get concerned about injuries and stuff like that. Well, I am here to put the follower on much more of a comforting level, to talk them off the ledge if they were nervous about Nick Loftin. There is nothing to worry about. I actually went to a Royals Review. Actually, I'm a contributor on Royals Review, not really much out of the season, but in the season, I'll usually do a lot of the game recaps. Been doing that for quite some time, but they had an article going back a couple of weeks about Nick Loftin and where he went to, but the Royals did pull Nick Loftin from the Arizona Fall League, and this was confirmed via league spokesperson to Bally Sports Kansas City on Saturday. The Royals sent Loftin home for the best interest of the infielder to transition into the offseason and preparation for 2024. Nothing too much to worry about there. This happens in the Arizona Fall League, and especially for guys that were called up late. I think Angel Serpa, he's still down there in the Arizona Fall League, but we see this a lot, that you go and maybe it's a hitter and they get 20 at-bats, and it's just 20 extra at-bats that they wanted in the Arizona Fall League. The Royals usually tell them, hey, we're going to get you some extra work in there, but then we're good. We saw enough. It's very comparable to me to a rehab stint. Now, maybe that's the bad comparison to use if you're worried about injuries, guys getting pulled, but it's just like a rehab stint where when you see enough, you feel like they're comfortable enough, they're hitting well enough, okay, we're good. You can come back up to the big league ball club. With the Arizona Fall League, sometimes you'll see a pitcher who was banged up for the majority of the year, a young pitcher, and they go out there and get a start or two and then go on home. Actually, I think the better comparison is it's just spring training, right? You see enough from the guy, okay, we're good. We don't need to play you anymore. I think that's what they saw in Nick Loftin. They got very good numbers from Nick Loftin to close out the year. Just wanted to see him get a little bit more, and then you move on. And you go, okay, now it's up to you this offseason to continue to train, to continue to work out so that when you show up to Surprise in February, you're ready to go to spring training and you're ready to compete for that second base job. That, to me, is what all this has been about for Nick Loftin. You know, his competition next year is going to be Michael Massey. And even if Michael Massey beats him out, which I'd imagine he will, there's a spot for Nick Loftin on this team. He can be the super utility guy coming off the bench and still give you about 100 to 120 games. I mean, if you can play left, center, right, short, third, second, and first base now, apparently, you can get in a lot of games this year. And that's kind of the role I view for him. Now, the offensive numbers, I think, looked a lot better than maybe the advanced metrics would show. A lot of singles. I didn't think he was hitting the ball exceptionally hard, but that can always change a little bit. The beauty of the Arizona Fall League is that you can get that confidence. You can just continue what you were doing in the regular season, and then you can move on from that point. You know, you can gather whatever it was in the Arizona Fall League, the success you had, and take that and carry it into the offseason, the true offseason, where you're no longer playing baseball. You could go to the Dominican Winter League, the Mexican Winter League, get some more work in there. But I'm just not sure what is next for Nick Loftin. But there's nothing to worry about there. He's not injured. It wasn't that he was playing poorly and they sent him home. They saw what they needed to see, and they sent him home. That's what you're going to see with a lot of guys in the Arizona Fall League. Because also, they are playing in live games. Injuries can be a concern, especially if you had inconsistent playing time and now you're playing every other day again. All of that can happen. And the last thing you want at the tail end of the year is for somebody to play in the Arizona Fall League and then get a season-ending injury that keeps you out for all of 2024. And Nick Loftin, it shows you that for the short time he was there in Arizona getting some extra work, what the Royals think about him. They didn't need to see 5, 6, 7, 8 games in that slate. They saw a couple, said, you're good. We don't even need to see better numbers at the plate. We don't need to see you hit 480 with 5 home runs in a couple of games. You don't need that. You just want to see, hey, maybe it goes like this too, that at the tail end of the year, Alex Zumwalt and Keone Duren gave him some stuff to tweak at the plate, change the hand placement, change your footwork in the box, change where, you hold the bat, just your swing in general, your follow through, little things that hitting coaches always preach. We saw with MJ Melendez right before the All-Star break, change his hand placement a little bit. It helped him tremendously in the second half. Maybe it was something like that for Kansas City where Nick Loftin had just made that adjustment, season ends, and you go, okay, let's go try it out for 3 or 4 games in the Arizona Fall League, and then we'll send you on your way. Nothing to worry about, though, whatsoever. Not really concerned about him battling any injury. The Royals not valuing him as much, not, setting a higher bar for him. They saw what they needed to see, probably was a tweak or an adjustment, and they sent him on home. Get him ready, get him back into training, get him built up, bulked up for the start of spring training, because his competition is going to be Michael Massey for second base. I think Michael Massey absolutely has the inside track, but Nick Loftin still very much has a spot on this team if he can perform well in spring training. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I have been your host, Jack Johnson, and you can always follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. Tomorrow, we are going to answer some questions for our Mailbag Friday. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.